Thank you, Darwin, and thank you, Providence team, for giving me this opportunity. The topic is very crystal clear: type 2 diabetes mellitus and high CV risk. What to choose after metformin. So it's a case-based discussion. So we will start with the case. He's a 45-year-old engineer. He's a businessman with weight loss. 2 weeks back, he checked his sugars and found that his RBS, glucometer RBS, is 270 milligram per deciliter. There is osmotic symptoms, weight loss, more than 10 kg over 6 months. Both parents diabetic, typical history of type 2 diabetes mellitus, but with no cardiovascular disease in the family. His A1C was 14% and his triglycerides were high, and the urine acetone was not detectable. And he had a mild elevated urine albumin creatinine ratio. This was done just as a package, and he came to us with a package. So this is the Q-risk calculator for his chance of having an atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease in the next 10 years. And the 10-year Q-risk score, you can see it's 11.9. Anything more than 10 is considered to be higher ASCVD. Another case scenario, again, these are all real case scenario. It's a 60-year-old female who she is diabetic and hypertensive for longer years. And she is on metformin for the past 8 years, but not optimally controlled. Her A1C is 8%, and she has got elevated serum albumin creatinine ratio. And in spite of being on atorvastatin, she has got a Q-risk score of 18%. And we calculate in such individuals who never developed a heart failure, we do a health ABC heart failure score, which is 6. And that means in the next 5 years, she has got a very high predilection to develop heart failure and hospitalization for the same. So with these kind of two cases in the background, we will try to discuss what we are supposed to. What is the increased atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus? What is the risk of heart failure in type 2 diabetes mellitus? What is the role of intensive glycemic control? Which medicine we are going to use? Sulfonylurea, pioglitazone, with the CVOT trials, DPP-4 inhibitor, GLP-1 receptor agonist, or the revolutionary class of SGLT2 inhibitors. We know that diabetes and cardiovascular disease is called the deadly duo because 2/3 of death in diabetes is due to cardiovascular disease. And this cardiovascular risk, it exists even before the onset of type 2 diabetes mellitus as evidenced by the Nurses Health Study. And when taken all the risk factors together, diabetes confers the highest lifetime risk for CAD for any single risk factor you take. And coming to the heart failure in type 2 diabetes mellitus, when this study was done in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus for 5 years and more, it was found that 68% of individuals have got cardiac failure, of which diastolic LV dysfunction along with systolic dysfunction predominates. So patients, even we say that it's LV diastolic dysfunction, which is more common, even they can have, if you look carefully, you can see that the person can have some amount of systolic LV dysfunction also. So when you compare patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction and reduced ejection fraction, patients with diabetes have got very high risk. So of hospitalization, repeat hospitalization, and death. So especially the presence of urine albumin creatinine, elevated urine albumin creatinine ratio, it increases the chance of having an atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and also it increases the risk for hospitalization for heart failure. So why the heart failure is more common is because we know that the cardiac myocyte mainly on rely mainly on fatty acids and to a good extent to glucose in its fuel needs. Lesser extent, they use lactate and ketone body. So this cardiac insulin resistance is due to the increased fatty acid transportation into the mitochondria of the myocyte, and also the decreased expression of GLUT4, which is shown in the experimental studies. So eventually what happens is there will be cardiomyocyte apoptosis, extracellular remodeling, increased inflammation. Actually, diabetes and obesity are states of chronic inflammation, low-grade inflammation, eventually leading to cardiac hypertrophy. So in the initial stages, you will have cardiac stiffness, hypertrophy, and fibrosis. But later stage, along with diastolic dysfunction, the systolic dysfunction also predominates. So what is the management for this patient? The first case, we know that the patient has got symptoms and an A1C more than 9%. So we will start the patient on insulin. When we start insulin for this individual, we initially weekly dose adjustment is done, and along with metformin. Lifestyle modification and alcohol abstinence. 2 months later, his triglyceride improved, A1C 7.6, and urine albumin creatinine ratio is within normal limits. Even though we checked HbA1c once in 3 months, the HbA1c is skewed towards the initial 2 months. So we can check the 2 months HbA1c also in occasionally. So along with metformin, which medications you are going to add for this individual? We know that metformin, unless intolerant or contraindicated, that is the first line treatment because there is an increased reduction of major cardiovascular events. So if not well controlled with metformin, what is the next medicine, next OHA to add? This slide shows that with every increase in A1C, that is beyond, even in normal A1Cs, you can see that the impact, the diabetes mellitus has got higher impact on presence of cardiovascular disease or coronary artery disease. And UKPD study has very well distinctly shown that intensive glycemic control in diabetes mellitus, whether you use sulfonylurea or whether you use insulin, the initial glycemic control is very important in preventing the further cardiovascular disease. But in the UKPDS, we have to understand one thing, that there is only 3% of individuals had prior CVD. All of other patients were naive and with stable cardiovascular, cardiac parameters. So this is a meta-analysis of all the intensive glucose control trial, which when we take that, they have some way they have achieved a reduction in non-fatal MI, any cardiovascular event, stroke, but the all-cause mortality, especially in the ACCORD study, we can see that the all-cause mortality was high. And this is a recent study which is published in BMJ. It says, this is from the UK general practitioners group. It was a retrospective study and they found that use of sulfonylurea was associated with higher incidence of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular death, ischemic stroke, and myocardial infarction. So, but sulfonylurea is the next best to insulin in achieving target glycemic control. If the patient is not symptomatic and you have naive type 2 diabetes mellitus patient, you can use sulfonylurea to achieve a good glycemic control. But with caution that higher incidence of hypoglycemia, usually this hypoglycemia is often unidentified and not rectified. So the patient will be subjected to recurrent hypoglycemic events. And the beta cell exhaustion associated with sulfonylurea is well proved by ADOPT study and so on. And it is shown that the sulfonylurea adversely affects the preconditioner, especially with the older generation sulfonylurea, when glycoside is comparatively better in this aspect. Next is regarding the pioglitazone, which is considered to be the forgotten cost-effective cardioprotective agent for type 2 diabetes mellitus. We have these various studies like PROACTIVE, which showed that there is a decrease in 47% reduction in stroke, 28% reduction in re-MI in patients with history of previous MI, decrease in the microalbuminuria as evidenced by CORTEX study. The Periscope study showed that intravascular coronary atheroma volume regresses if you treat with pioglitazone. There's a reduction in carotid intima-medial thickness. And in the GPRD study, they showed that 39% when added along with metformin, the hazard ratio comes to 0.75. And this is a recent study published in 2016 NEJM that says that in patients who had stroke and increased insulin resistance, when you give metformin, pioglitazone, that dose we used was very high, 45 milligram. And they found that the pioglitazone is associated with lower incidence of recurrent stroke. The hazard ratio was only 0.76, but at the expense of bone fracture and weight gain. Why pioglitazone has got a protective effect is because the PPAR gamma receptors are expressed in endothelial cells, arterial smooth muscle cells, monocyte and macrophages. So I said that there is a chronic low-grade inflammation in patients with obesity and diabetes, where this pioglitazone attenuates the inflammation and decreases the smooth cell proliferation. Not only that, it reduces the visceral fat area. So whenever you look for the waist circumference, it is not very reliable marker of efficacy in pioglitazone or insulin resistance in patients who are on pioglitazone, because the subcutaneous fat will be increased, but the visceral fat area will come down. So waist circumference may be abnormally high. And also it decreases the inflammatory markers like hsCRP, the triglycerides comes down, the free fatty acids come down. The LDL cholesterol is considered to be on the higher side once you start pioglitazone, but it is shown that it decreases the dense small atherogenic LDL cholesterol and converts to large LDL cholesterol, which are very buoyant, and also decreases the BP, attenuates and retards the microalbuminuria, and reduces the hypercoagulability associated with diabetes. The other outcome trials, what are the evidences? This is with the DPP-4 inhibitors. When you take the SAVOR-SIMI with saxagliptin, EXAMINE study with alogliptin, TCOS, sitagliptin, and Carmelina, all these studies have shown that cardiovascular adverse events are not seen in patients who are on SGLT2, the patients who are on DPP-4 inhibitors. But SAVOR-TIMI trial has shown that there is increased risk of hospitalization for heart failure when you use saxagliptin. And when you take GLP-1 receptor agonist, Alexa study, LEADER study, SUSTAIN study, EXCEL study, and HARMONY study were invariably proved that, except the Alexa study where lixisenatide was used, all other studies have shown that the cardiovascular events are less compared to the standard of care treatment in patients who are receiving GLP-1 receptor agonist. So the next is this is the star of the decade, that is the SGLT2 inhibitors. When you come to SGLT2 inhibitors, this is the first study which came in, that is the EMBARAG outcome. And you can see that the cardiovascular death and non-fatal MI, this group of patients already had cardiovascular disease. And you can see the secondary prevention to this extent that it was even comparable to statin or more than that, that it decreases cardiovascular death and non-fatal MI. But the increase in non-fatal stroke was seen in this group of patients, but it was not statistically significant. And EMBARAG outcome showed that there is a decrease in 35% chance of heart failure. And even the CANVAS program subsequently came and showed that there is a reduction in CV death, non-fatal MI, and non-fatal stroke did not show much evidence, but CV death and non-fatal MI was less in patients who were taking canagliflozin. And DECLARE-TIMI, the last one came was with dapagliflozin, which showed that there is a decrease in the CV death and non-fatal MI, but the non-fatal stroke again didn't show much reduction. So these are the meta-analysis in a nutshell, that EMBARAG outcome, CANVAS program, DECLARE-TIMI trial, and every trial showed that there is an increase, there is a reduction in heart failure and CV death in patients who take SGLT2 inhibitors. Why SGLT2 inhibitors are so good? That is, one is that the decline in plasma volume associated with SGLT2 inhibitors. We know that the basic pathology in diabetes, and which leads to diabetic nephropathy, etc., is the expansion in the plasma volume. This is taken care of very well by SGLT2 inhibitors. And SGLT2 inhibitors, as already mentioned by the previous speaker, that SGLT2 inhibitors improve the ventricular loading conditions. That's because the plasma volume comes down, the preload improves. So this, as you know, that the Stark-Frankel law, you know that the dynamics of the myocardium improves, and also the increased sodium delivery. This lead to afferent arteriolar constriction, which lead to decrease in the proteinuria. So, and the most important thing, which is now proved, is that the sodium hydrogen ion exchange, which occurs in the myocardium, is taken care of well by SGLT2 inhibitors. That is why even in low GFR, the cardiac energy, kinetics are very well preserved. The cardiac benefits of SGLT2 inhibitors are very well preserved, even if the GFR is decreased. When the sodium hydrogen exchange is expressed, the higher calcium is seen in the cytoplasm, but not in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum shows that there is ineffective calcium handling, leading to mitochondrial dysfunction. And not only that, earlier mentioned that loop diuretics cause increased intravascular volume depletion, while SGLT2 inhibitors cause more of interstitial volume. So the pericardial interstitial volume also comes down. This also improves the kinetics. So benefits of SGLT2 inhibitors is that beyond glycemic control, the cardiac benefits are preserved even in subjects with low GFR. Improvement in hematocrit, which is not seen in renin-angiotensin-aldosterone blockade, because the renal cortical cells, which recover from the hyperglycemia, they become more effective in erythropoietin production. So in CKD, the decline in hemoglobin which you see will be improved. And this increase in hematocrit can sometimes, increases the viscosity, and that may be the attributable thing for the increased stroke, which are not explained, even though it is not very well clearly established. That may be one plausible mechanism. So SGLT2 inhibitors definitely cause significant weight loss, initially due to the decrease in the extracellular fluid volume, but later the adipose mass as such comes down, but the lean mass or the muscle mass is not affected. And SGLT2 inhibitors are known to attenuate the inflammation. So this case too, we told she was on metformin and she has high risk of heart failure. So we started on SGLT2 inhibitors full dose, and perineal hygiene was advised. She lost 2.5 kg, her BP improved, A1C 7.2%. For her age, this is a reasonable A1C. So far, no adverse events, and more importantly, she didn't have any hypoglycemia. So to summarize, in patients with established ASCVD and inadequate glycemic control, SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonists are the best second-line agents. But if you have without established ACVD, even now also SGLT2 inhibitors have got a major role. SGLT2 inhibitors improves heart failure by various mechanisms and prevents hospitalization for heart failure. If there is no heart failure risk, pioglitazone is widely shown to prevent MACE, especially CVA, and should be used liberally, especially in appropriately selected individuals. DPP-4 inhibitors are ACVD neutral, and sulfonylurea intensifies good glycemic control, but in subjects with ACVD is better prevented. So higher events of MACE are especially seen in long duration diabetes, individuals with multiple comorbid conditions, and elderly people who are vulnerable to hypoglycemia. Thank you.